Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to another live episode of Dattitude. It is episode number 146. We are here live this morning. Christian Clark, Times-Picayune The Advocate beat writer of the New Orleans Pelicans, is here to join us because we have all kinds of happy news here on this Friday morning. Happy news about the New Orleans Pelicans. If we don't have any, we'll make something up. I'm just kidding. Christian, how are you doing this morning? I know in a way it's a relief. In a way, you wish it would keep going a little bit longer, but it is what it is. Where are you feeling this morning?
Well, thanks for having me on. Is the happy news that the season is over?
I'm not sure if it's happy or sad at this point. There's been so much going on, especially the last week of news feels like it took a month.
It absolutely did. I mean, I would say alarm bells really started going off in my head when I asked Willie Green, the last week of the regular season, it was their second to last practice. And I said, "Hey, did Zion practice today?" And he said, "No." And I was like, in my head, I was like, well, they have two practices left in the regular season. And if he didn't practice in the second to last one, that's probably not good news for Zion getting back on the court this season. And yeah, I mean, they just went out weird. Zion not practicing, warming up before the game, dunking. It didn't look incredibly in shape or anything like that.
Right.
And just not playing in the most important game of the season again.
Well, we are obviously going to talk about Zion and a whole lot of other things. In fact, I'm going to show you our headlines for today. Although it's kind of misleading. You see the Saints stuff, Christian and I may sneak in a little. I might ambush him and like ask him one Saints question at the end, even though that's not what he covers. But this is our Dattitude Podcast topic. So whatever you don't get here on the live portion, you go wherever you find your podcast. My monologue today is going to be mostly about the Saints. I will touch on the Pelicans. Most of you heard what I think about the Pels and the disappointing finish against Oklahoma City. But really, that might be a little misleading too, because it's not just the finish against Oklahoma City that's disappointing. It's really how they've played just the last week of the season. You can go back to that Rockets loss, Christian, and that was kind of foreshadowing of what we were going to see, right? This season, to me, and the first headline here on the bottom of the crawl is, this season was the complete opposite of last year. They start off fast, unlike 2022 when they start off, 3-23 or whatever the heck it was. And, that you think this is the year. This is what we were promised. This is what we thought was going to happen. And then it just rolls into something negative and snowballs into – they were really lucky to make the play-in. They got hot towards the end to get to number 9. But, this whole season could have been something a lot different.
And I think that's what's the most frustrating part about all of this. We saw how good this team was when Zion was healthy and in shape, and you had the role players going around them. I mean, if you think back to that 7-game winning streak, which included those 2 wins over the Suns, which were so fun to watch at home, that actually came without Brandon Ingram. I mean, we saw this team be really good, even without Brandon Ingram, who is a very good player when he plays. And it's like, if they could ever just get these guys on the same court, I mean, I really do think this could be a team that could make a deep playoff run. I think the stat of the season is that it was 10. It was C.J. McCollum, Brandon Ingram, and Zion Williamson played in 10 games together. C.J. spoke at length about that after Pelicans were eliminated by OKC. That was really the biggest issue. Like, these guys just got to play together more.
Jim Derry here with Christian Clark on this Friday morning. We are welcoming your comments and questions. If you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, just type it in the comment section and it'll appear here and we'll show it on the screen. We welcome them every Friday morning. And again, when we're done here, I'll have my monologue, and wherever you find your podcast, you can find Dattitude. Christian, for you, what was it like? What was that last month like? And I'm sure that Willie Green was tired of hearing the same old questions. You talked about it. But what was it like covering this team? And basketball is so much different than football. You're doing so many things outside of the game part of it. But, along in basketball and in baseball, we don't have a baseball team, but you have to cover all these different things, and you have games in between. So what was it like to cover this team the last month of the season when you didn't really know what you were going to get?
Look, I'm just going to be honest here. Like, I think I probably felt like a lot of fans. Like, I'm just exhausted by the BS. Like, I just want to watch basketball. And so much of the last 4 years is just not about basketball. It's, oh, is Zion happy? Is he in shape? Is he showing up on time? And it's just like how hard is it to to just play in the games. Like, so much of the conversation has not even been the basketball part of it with the Pelicans. It's been stuff outside of it because they just can't get this guy on the court. So I would just say, like, just tired of all the stuff outside of it. Like, I would just love to talk about what happens in between the lines, but you can't do that with this team.
Did you feel like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day?
Yes.
What day is it? I don't know. It's the same one as yesterday. I mean, we're asking the same questions that we asked. I guess, you saw it even on the court Wednesday night. You saw the talent that this team has, even without Zion. I mean, this team has the talent to be a mid-level type conference. I mean, to me, they're the fourth or fifth best team in this conference. I mean, they're similar to Golden State in the fact of a disappointment. And you look at what the Warriors have done. If they could have done anything on the road, they'd have been a top 2, top 3 seed. So to me, they're probably just behind Golden State as far as talent goes, but they're not far behind. And those two, to me, are the two biggest disappointments in the Western Conference going into this year. Again, even without Zion. But when all these things are bringing you down, they're humans. And and I want to get to the C.J. McCollum comments in just a minute, but you got to feel the disappointment that they feel.
I mean, most definitely. And I just think that, like, the season really hinged on Zion playing 29 games and Brandon Ingram playing, I think, 45 games.
Yeah.
And so many people are like working so hard to try to help the Pelicans win. And I think for, the people who are like putting in those hours, a lot of players on the roster, for example, who are grinding through discomfort and out there every single night, and people on the coaching staff and like people even in the ticket office, it's like, what are we working so hard for if these guys just aren't going to play basketball? Like, what's the point of any of this if the guys who get paid the most and plastered on billboards just aren't going to play?
We talked about that in Bayou Bets. Like, the disappointment probably runs throughout the entire organization. And if you're a player and you read what C.J. McCollum is, and I'm going to read those in a minute, we have a question but it's going to bring you down. And we have a question which kind of leads into some of the things that I want to talk to. Austin Mumphrey asked, Christian, what do you think, what offseason moves the team needs to make? That's an overall general question, and I don't think we're trying to get too specific, but just from your perspective, what does this team need to do to get to be the team that we think they can be?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious thing is get Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram on the basketball court. Those two guys combined to play in 45% of the team's regular season games. I think literally any NBA team, if their best two players play 45% of the games, it's going to be an underwhelming season. So that's the first thing. I think you probably got to run it back with those guys just because they're so good, and it's hard to get talent in New Orleans. I mean, I think you have to be aware of that reality. So I would anticipate them running back with those two guys. And I think, the one thing you look at is maybe the center position. I mean, I'm a Jonas Valanciunas fan. Like, me and him personally have a very good relationship. I think he's a talented offensive player. Defensively, he can struggle. And we saw with Willie Green. Willie Green is going to favor defense more than offense. He wants to put defensive-minded players around his stars on the court, and that is not really JV's strength. And I think that's one you look at of maybe look at somebody who's a little more switchy or more athletic. And, like Jonas is a very good back to the basket player, but they just didn't look for him a lot in those scenarios. So he's got 1 year left in his deal. That's one I would look at. And the other thing is just more shooting. I mean, this team just can't, they didn't take enough threes and they didn't make enough threes. So they definitely need more shooting.
Jonas Valanciunas, I'm glad you bring that name up because I would have forgot to ask you this question. Can you tell me why, with a minute and 10 seconds left on the court and the season on the brink, Jackson Hayes was on the floor and JV wasn't?
Well, I mean, from my understanding, it was an ankle issue actually at the end of OKC. It was, I think he twisted his ankle with like 4.5 minutes left, and I think he would have closed that game if not for that.
That explains it, but that was frustrating to, look, I love Jackson and I love his persona, but man. He had one really good stretch of about 3 or 4 weeks this year. Other than that, he was almost a no-show, and I really thought he was going to continue his growth or at least take another step, and to me he didn't, but that's a whole nother story. All right, Campbell asks, if one doesn't, or says, if one doesn't want to play, one must do what's best for the team. Give it your all. Don't keep letting your team down. Praying for the Pels. That's part of, to me, what where we are with Zion. And you could have a Pelicans podcast and talk 59 minutes about Zion. And I don't really want to do that, but I think in this case, you have to talk about it here and how I'll let down. I thought your story yesterday and the Christian McCollum comments were very telling. And not just that he says, quote, for us to be successful in the future, we have to be able to play together. We need our best players on the court. But to me, the quote that stuck out more than anything, we talked about this yesterday on Bayou Bets, throughout my career, I've always been a player to do whatever it takes to help the team. I could have taken the easy way out and got surgery and sat and watched. I'm not that type of person. I'm not that type of player, even though it affected my performance, which it clearly did. I just went and competed the best I can. I'm always trying to lead by example. If that wasn't a shot across the bow, I've never heard one.
I mean, you're right. And I think, we all understand, hey, look, if you're playing when you're banged up, I mean, maybe the results won't be there. If you're out there competing, like sometimes it's just not going to go your way. We're all understanding of that. I'm just not understanding of like, if you're not even going to try. And I think his comments, honestly, like everyone's going to remember the Zion part of this because of the way it ended. But I took those comments as much about Brandon Ingram as Zion.
Really?
I think it was about both of those guys, because if you look at, like when Zion got hurt, when he, like metaphorically passed the baton or whatever, they were in third place in the West. They're one game out of first, and they sunk quickly. They went on a 10-game losing streak. Zion did not play in any of those 10. Brandon Ingram did not play in 6 of those 10. And I mean, I reported at the time, there's frustration in the organization about Ingram's absence for 29 games with an injury the team described as a left toe contusion. A bunch of people in the organization felt like he shouldn't have missed that amount of games. This was the second season in a row. I think there was frustration in the organization about the amount of games he missed with minor injuries. So I think CJ's comments were about both of those guys.
You clearly saw that it did affect the way he played, especially down the stretch. And, there's a fine line somewhere. Do you sit out and do what you need to do to make this injury better? But he was missing free throws. You don't see C.J. McCollum miss free throws like he missed to me in the last couple weeks of the season. But at the same time, you don't realize how much leadership on a court means. And I thought that his presence and him being there and him going through every single one of his rotations was important. And I mean, what's your feelings on the thing, and what did you see?
In terms of
C.J. McCollum and how much the injury affected him the last couple of weeks or last 3-4 weeks of the season?
Yeah, I think it affected him a lot. The thumb thing happened in late January. He wore a splint on his right hand for basically the last 3 months of the season. I talked to him about it. It was a ligament issue. He said it affected his ball handling. He said, sometimes when he shot the ball, like it would just come off funny, especially with the splint on there. Like it was hard for him to just like get the grip he wanted to. Like a torn, Will Guillory of The Athletic, my buddy reported that CJ is dealing with a torn labrum too. I mean, that's a serious injury. That's going to be another that requires surgery. So I do think it affected him a lot. You could just see it. It was significant.
Will Guillory, a former TP alum. So, all these TP, I want to know how it happens, and I'm sure it's going to happen to you, Christian. You're young. You're gonna move on to at some point to bigger and better things. I'm not asking you to comment on this. I'm being semi-facetious, but I have Mike Smith is one of my good friends. We kind of grew up in the business together, and he's gone on. He went on to ESPN. He's got his own show now for NBC, and here I am, an old man doing podcast. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but. One of these days I'm going to see you on ESPN.
I don't know, man. If the Pelicans keep going the way they're going, probably not.
They're not really helping you much, are they?
Probably not.
It is a grind. I mean, covering basketball and baseball, and another TP alum, one of my good friends is Derek Gould, who's going to be on this show very, very soon, by the way, who covers the St. Louis Cardinals and one of the best baseball writers on the planet. covering basketball on a daily basis. And then you don't get much break. I mean, I know football is the grind too, but at least football you can do things from home and all these things. But how tough is it to cover? And I'm not just talking about the Pelicans because every team has their own stories. I imagine covering the Lakers is probably tougher than this. But how tough is the grind of covering basketball day after day after day?
82 games is a lot of games, man. It's a lot of games. I've said for years I think the season is just too long. I mean, I think it was a huge mistake for the players union in the league not to shorten the season in that last round of collective bargaining agreement to like 70 games and just eliminate back-to-backs together. Like that was a real step they should have taken. It's like, let's just cut out back-to-backs. Like the product sucks on the second night of a back-to-back. Like it's making the regular season product way worse. But it's a lot of work, and it's nothing compared to baseball writers either.
Is there any way that we can stop the Stars sitting out? Not necessarily the second game of a back-to-back, because I think they choose which one they want them to sit out. But, especially with Golden State. I mean, they were the most ridiculous offender of the entire thing. I don't know how many games that their stars didn't play this year. And, Steph Curry, I think he just got to where he was only playing 2-3 times a week at different parts of the season. But is there any way to stop this?
Shortening the season, I think, would have helped. I guess I'm curious to see, and I think we have seen this, like even with Zion, do they try to put in more games played clauses into these contracts? Like is your money going to get messed up if you're just only out there for 30 games every season? It's been 28 and a half games per season for Zion, by the way, in his 4 years in the NBA. But that's one thing I'm looking at. I mean, one thing they tried to do in the last CBA was you have to play a minimum of 65 games to be eligible for awards, MVP, All NBA, etc. Maybe that helps. Like that was a step. Maybe it helps. Maybe it doesn't. But it's thorny. And yeah, I guess like the biggest thing is, are they just going to put games played clauses in a lot of these contracts?
And the problem is, I don't know that there are still going to be so many players who don't care. They don't care if they win those awards or not. And I still have the number up on my screen from yesterday. Zion Williamson is making per game, whether he plays or he doesn't play, and this is before he signed the extension that is going to give him even more money, $143,506 per game. When you make that kind of money, do you even care whether you're in the running for MVP or most improved player or whatever other award they have?
I think it's a legitimate question. And the other thing too is Zion is a signature shoe guy. I think he got $80 million contract from Jordan before he ever played in an NBA game, because look, he had an incredible season at Duke. I get it, but he secured, like generational wealth basically before he played in an NBA game. And he has not looked very motivated to me. No. He's been a pretty bad professional. And so, I mean, you can't help but think that it does affect you.
He blew one of those shoes out, by the way. So how good are those shoes? That's a whole different story. All right, Shamar asked, does ownership even care? Of course they care. But I'm gonna let Christian answer that question. But you don't think they want to see a bad product on the floor, do you?
I think they do care. I mean, I think after the Anthony Davis embarrassment, they took a hard look at it and said, like, we need to become a more serious franchise. I think, I won't throw around any figures, but I think if you look at their spending on basketball operations, David Griffin and his team, that is way, way up. They've given them a lot more resources than there used to be before 2019. So yeah, I think they do.
That leads into another topic that we talked about yesterday, and my rant of the day yesterday was the fact that this team has worked so hard to get it to where that Smoothie King Center is filled. I mean, think back, it wasn't that long ago when you'd had 5, 6, they'd report that there were 11,000 fans there because that's the tickets they sold, and businesses were buying tickets and writing them off and not going to games, not even giving them away. But, now you have sold-out arenas when this team plays. And, again, throughout the days of the Hornets and well into the Pelicans, and except for that brief time when AD led this team to within, inches of going to the conference finals. They have worked hard to get to where they are. They don't want to go back to the days where the arena's half filled. And if they don't start winning games, if they don't get back to the excitement level that we had at the end of 2022 and the beginning of this season, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and like this regime under David Griffin, like they've tried to get guys who will embrace being in New Orleans, and I think they have a lot of those guys. Like Jose Alvarado, like definitely plays for the name on the front of the jersey. Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, like there's a lot of those guys. Larry Nance Jr. It's just the most important guy. Like we're kind of just waiting for him to get on board. And in terms of fan engagement, not this season but the season before, there was a national TV game against the Atlanta Hawks, and I was told there was actually 5,000 people in the building. So, pretty close to there. It was pretty empty. And by the end of the year, the Smoothie King Center was packed and it was roaring. And they've really made some strides there. And I would just hate to see them backslide.
You ain't the only one. All right, Rob asked a really good, has a really good comment because I agree with him 100%. You can hate Draymond Green all you want when I read this out. I'd love to see a vet like Boogie Cousins or Draymond on this squad. They'll need a vet that can get in Zion's face. You know that Draymond Green does that with his home team when he has to. You don't have to get in Steph Curry's face, by the way. But he does it when he has to, and he leads by example. Draymond Green is a guy you can hate. 29 other teams can hate him or whatever it is, but if he's on your team, you love him. And I think the Pels would be great. CJ is a great leader, but he's not a get-in-your-face guy. I think the Pels could use a get-in-your-face guy.
I don't think you're wrong. And what's interesting is I think some people who make decisions on the Pels feel that way too. I mean, I've had conversations with them about that they feel like maybe we do kind of need another jerk,
It helps to have one.
Yeah, I mean, like a word that David Griffin used a lot and a lot of people on the roster used a lot was accountability. They felt like they need to be a little bit more accountable, those last 2-3 months of the season. Like a Draymond Green type definitely helps you there.
Well, we'll see if they get that in the offseason. All right, I do want to, we can talk about him and what he's done in the past, but what is your gut feeling on what this team? I mean, I don't think there's any way they trade Zion. I don't think you can, first of all. I think with it where you are money-wise and you've put so much into Zion staying here, I think trading him is almost out of the question. What is your gut feeling on what we will see going into next year? Do you think he's going to take this offseason seriously and come in here and look the way that he looked at the beginning of this season?
I honestly have no idea how he's going to react to this. I've been wrong on this so many times before, so I can't even try to predict how Zion is going to think. But yeah, I hope he takes a hard look in the mirror after all this and is like, well, shoot, man, CJ just tried to play through 2 pretty serious injuries. He played in 75 of the 82 games. I wasn't taking my rehab very seriously after the re-injury. I could not get my weight under control after the re-injury. I mean, he just needs to take a hard look in the mirror. I think some of the people around him, and like, there's so much just noise around Zion all the time. Like the talking heads love to talk about him. The best thing I've heard, in like the last few weeks, just about the Zion situation is from Raja Bell, who's in the NBA for a long time, just kind of notorious tough guy. And he's like, look, man, Zion can blame everybody, and maybe there's something to it, and maybe there's not, but he just got to want it for himself. And yeah. I just agree with that advice. It's like, you just got to do it for yourself. You can either choose to work hard and do the things you need to do or not.
Yeah, well, it's tough. It's tough to watch it, and it really is. Rob says if Draymond Green wasn't the same guy that drafted Anthony Bennett, the chances of trading Zion would be Griffin. I'm sorry. If Griffin wasn't the same guy that drafted Anthony Bennett, the chance of trading Zion would be higher. I'm not going to blame David Griffin for this. You have to take him number one. We go back and you talk about this team can have Ja Morant. I mean, and Ja Morant has his own problems as well. But if you go back in time and with that number one pick, you simply have to take Zion Williamson there. I mean, and people talk about this. If they would have taken this, and we talked about it in the show, and Zach Ewing loves to bring it up all the time. Had they drafted, it doesn't matter. You go back in time, you cannot take anyone else but Zion Williamson with that spot. I mean, you agree with that, right?
I think 30 out of the 30 NBA teams would have taken Zion number one overall in that draft. I mean, that's that was one of the best individual college seasons I've ever watched.
Me too.
I mean, it was absurd. And it wasn't even just on the offensive end. Like, he was just a two-way force. Like, he was in the top 5 in steals and blocks in the ACC that year. Like, he did everything. You know, his teammates, like, clearly loved playing with him. They were like, oh, Duke, it's a brotherhood. Like, him and RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish had a great relationship. So, yeah, I mean, maybe there were some, like, red flags that we all should have seen. But, I mean, I think all 30 NBA teams would have taken Zion number 1.
Does this team get better going into next year? Are they higher than a play-in type of team next year?
Yeah, I think they are. I mean, if you just ask me, you know, will Brandon and Zion play more than 45% of the games next year? I think I would just say probably yes. And I think I would just guess yes based on that. I mean, it couldn't be much worse.
What do you do now that it's the off season? How long before you start preparing for 2023, 24?
Yeah, I mean, they've got a first-round pick. I guess that can fall between 12 and 14. That'll be interesting to watch. Like, they pretty much just ran it back, you know, last year. They just said, all right, let's just keep the same roster and see how it works together. I mean, I don't think they're going to do that this year. You can't just run it back with completely the same roster. So just try to figure out what they're going to do and then react to it when free agency time comes in July.
You get a vacation.
Oh yeah, I'll get out of Louisiana in August. That's probably the best month to get out of here, right?
There is zero question about that. That is most certainly true. All right, before I let you go, I told you I was going to ambush you with one Saints question. What position are the Saints going to draft when they go up to the podium? Well, they don't really go up to the podium anymore, but 2 weeks from yesterday, first round pick. What are they gonna pick?
I'm not the right person to ask anything about Saints.
Flip it up. We're all flip. None of us are. We said this yesterday. All these mock drafts, you can have mock drafts, and it's in every sport. I don't care what sport you talk about. No one has any clue because the team doesn't have a clue. And it's the same in basketball. No one has a clue. So, I mean, we can just flip coins and talk about it all week.
Well, I mean, obviously, they solidified the quarterback position this offseason. Could they just take another one?
Anything's possible. You know what? At this point, I've seen it all. So, I mean, barring drafting a punter or a kicker or some long snapper or just some dude that was projected to go in the 5th round, I really think I've seen it all. So, who knows? You will too, my friend, before time is up. You will have seen it all one day for sure. I appreciate you joining us here on the Dattitude Podcast. It has been, your insight has been just priceless here because, you know what? We need someone that sees this team and covers them every day to give us the rundown on what's going on. I don't want to say what's going wrong because not everything went wrong. I mean, it's, you know, a lot of times, a lot of seasons, we would have loved to have seasons like this, but man, hopefully it'll be better than that for you next year.
Hey, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Christian Clark here on the Dattitude Podcast. A reminder before we go off today, you can, wherever you get your podcast, my monologue will be pretty much on the Saints. I will mention the Pelicans, and I promise to have something positive to say this morning. So I'm not sure exactly what it's going to be yet, but that'll be up around noon. Wherever you get your podcast, search for Dattitude, and we'll be back at 9:15 next Friday, of course, talking about the Saints and the draft. We thank Christian Clark for joining us today. We'll see you next week, and have a wonderful weekend, everybody.